meeting to order, the Policy and Governance Committee. It's Tuesday, September 5th, 2017. Thank you everybody for being here in a punctual manner. First item of business is to look at the minutes from June 6th, 2017. Seems like a decade ago. Any additions, comments, or deletions, Director Ressler?
We approve that. Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Next notice of, motion passed, sorry. Next item is the notice of non-discrimination, which was a late ad by...
And I can fill you in. Kingsley's not here, so we had a desk audit, which is a routine process of the Department of Ed. They come in, they look at the way you do business, and if they see things that need to be changed, they let you know what those are. So in our notice of non-discrimination last spring, they had a couple things that they wanted us to update. We went ahead and updated those at the time in June, so we've been using them since then. So we are in compliance with the DE requirement. When the DE went through to sign off on the desk audit, the one thing that they shared was that they asked that the board approve or accept those changes because in the district they fall under administrative guidelines. They weren't brought forward to the board at the time. So we need to have this on the agenda at the next board meeting on September 12th for the board to accept those changes that have been in place since June. The one thing that I was trying to get for you, which I was not able to do before the meeting started today, is because those changes were made back in June, the version that you have in front of you is not a red line version. So I will have Kingsley provide us with a red line version so you can see the changes that were made prior to the board meeting. So we will post a red line version of it when we bring it up there.
I had one question.
Yes, sir.
On, in code, admin guideline 104.2.
Yes.
Page 8, under decision and appeal.
Getting there.
That's good.
All right. Got it?
So there's a whole paragraph about 8 lines long, and then there's one line paragraph, the decision of the superintendent shall be final. And I'm curious, in this instance, when somebody would be filing a complaint about discrimination, I just wanted to check and see. I wouldn't think that's something that would be within the purview of the board, but I'm curious if that's why that one, it doesn't say anything about appealing to the board. It says, the next line says appealing to this in no way prejudices the party from seeking redress through state or federal agencies as provided in law. Is that why that does not?
I believe that is the case, that in this instance, the next step is to file an appeal through the state to the Department of Ed.
Okay. It might be good if this is on September 12th, if we end up moving this to September 12th to get a clarification.
Yep,
to make
I'll
sure.
have Kingsley
I would
fill us in
imagine
on
that
that.
same question might come up. But it looked like it was 104.1, 104.2, and 105, I think it was. Right.
I will confirm with him. I believe that's the case. And like I said, I know that he went through this revision process with the department. So I'm presuming that falls in line with their language process for these policies.
Right, it's just that it's different than our normal complaint process, so.
Yep.
I would expect, was the Appendix 6 complaint process, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Director Ressler?
You'll send a note to the board that we're adding this topic.
Yes. And I will get, like I said, I'll get Kingsley to send me the red line version from last June so we can put that on here so you can see the changes.
Anything to add, Director Ressler? Mitch?
Nope, good to go.
Okay, I say we just get that clarified and then take it to the board on the 12th.
All right.
Moving on. Appendix 8. So, Director Lynch, since you're sitting in, I'll just fill you in on why this still isn't done. This is like the last item of business due from last year's calendar of work. And that's the Appendix 8, the committee charters. We went through them carefully with a fine-tooth comb, and it was almost a year ago. It was about 10 months ago, I think, when we had this discussion. But There was an idea floated that for the Ed committee that we would have both ICEA members and one non-ICEA member as part of the Ed committee. A lot can change in a year. And in light, I don't think anybody saw the collective bargaining changes coming at the state level. It's fairly safe to say that collective bargaining across the state and very much so in our teachers has been, the changes have been felt hard and heavy. And they've lost a lot of power, and considering that our 7-member approval of the statement of their collective bargaining rights and their rights as a union, that I was going to propose striking the final portion of the last sentence in order to preserve the value of being a member in the union and getting your voice to the table.
Yep, that's giving my input as well, so you put a period at ICA and scratch the rest.
And Director Ressler was part of that initial conversation. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I mean, we just want to make sure everyone was being represented, and I'm okay with it.
I think the key is you can always add more if you want, but this would be, the minimum, right? So,
Right, and I mean, this is like a shall. You could always invite others,
right.
but I think that.
I'm good. That was giving my 2 cents, having read it too, was to scratch that last part of the sentence.
Okay.
So I'm good.
So period after ICEA, strike the remainder of the sentence?
I would say the committee will be a committee of the whole, administration and 3 staff members nominated. Wow.
I guess it's not quite there. It'd be just scratch that and one non-ICA member.
And keep the will also participate.
Right.
Right.
You can wordsmith the sentence, but
Committee will be a committee of the whole with administration and 3 staff members nominated by the ICEA.
Here, got them? All right.
Does that work
Very
for
good.
you?
Yeah, well, I mean, the sentence as it was before, if you put with back in participation,
Yeah.
and then put the period after ICA.
Yep.
Yep.
Perfect.
All right.
Beautiful. Okay. Ready to move on?
Everything else on there was good. I think that was one that we didn't change.
Yeah,
Right.
everything else was good and finalized, but if you remember, this got to the board table and back in May, and we said, let's
Yeah.
put this back to P&G, which brought it
Yep.
here. And it sat all summer because we didn't meet since, I think, June. So, so we're ready to take, with that one wordsmithing, we're ready to take that back to board on the 12th, 26th.
yeah, I don't know. The new board should take it up whenever they're ready. Don't you think?
I'd just like to finish up because it's last year's calendar work for the P&G. It's like the last item that's left over. What do you think you're going to be here after the 12th?
Well, I'm open to whatever. I mean, I don't see it being an issue getting approved. So.
I propose we bring it, and if they punt it back to the next board, that's fine, but considering it's, to me, since it's work done almost, from roughly October until May. I don't know.
26th or 12th?
Just put on, why don't we just put on 26?
Okay.
Then you guys can decide if you want to table it or.
Yeah, there you go. I like it.
Then at least it's coming back, it's a final product, and if you choose not to,
I'm just big on finishing things.
Yep. Sure.
I never left the last chapter of a book unread.
It's always a key discussion at the beginning of a new board, even though it's easier to at least initially stick with, what's worked.
But
But
it'll be fine. It'll be good for the new board to look at it anyway, because that policy talks about all of the committees.
Yeah.
yeah, it's good onboarding anyway.
I like it. Great idea. Okay, to the 26th. Moving on to the item D, the MIS schedule with, regarding special ed updates. looking at the MIS schedule, Steve, I was going to ask you, what's a realistic expectation
For,
for frequency with which we could, as a board, receive special ed updates?
I would think, and Matt and Amy are here, but I would think that at least at this juncture, in terms of where we're at, new sped director on board, change underway, I would think that hearing quarterly would provide an opportunity, if you think about it, kind of at the end of the quarter, so to speak. So if you heard one in March, heard one again in June, I heard one again in September, and then heard one in December. If you think about that from the schedule, that September one would be at the end of the first month of school, so that'd give you an opportunity to get an update. December, March, and then in June, you'd get a wrap-up at the end of the year.
Guess my only question is it really an MIS item, you know what I mean?
Not necessarily, but one of the things you'll notice is the schedule that we have attached is a comprehensive schedule. It lists everything. So it's not just the MIS reports, but it's essentially the board calendar for the year. So we could certainly add it in on there so that you could see where it would fall from a timing
Well, help you
standpoint.
schedule it, yeah.
Yeah.
And balance the load.
So the other thing is that the MIS schedule is Appendix 3, correct?
It is.
So that's on the schedule to be reviewed by P&G next year. So I suppose if it doesn't work quarterly,
Sure.
they could look at the frequency. I mean, the other thing is that with Lisa here, with the new special ed director, you know, and right now, considering that we've just received notification from OCR, from Department of Ed, et cetera, and from the ADA, that it might be a time when we want to look at it quarterly, but they might choose, as they review the MIS schedule, to do less so
Right.
going forward, right?
Right.
That's my thoughts on it.
And again, so as a place to start, I think quarterly reviews, at least certainly for this year, would be appropriate. And then as we move forward and the program continues to progress, I think at some point in time you might want to back up. You might want to be every 6 months, but I think there's still that opportunity, at least at this stage of the game, to look at it quarterly.
You know, Chris and Paul, whenever we've had, you know, the last 4 years, issues where we need to remedy things, we've always looked at a new normal, a breakthrough, you know, in the way that we're going to improve going forward. And I think that making part of MIS is a way that we could improve. So I'd recommend, or I'd take Steve's recommendation for quarterly and bring it forward, knowing full well that P&G will be reviewing MIS next year.
Sounds good.
Cool. We're good there?
Yep, we'll get that changed, and we will get the new version uploaded.
Okay. Item E, fraternization. Thank you, whoever put together all of the various examples. University of Iowa, Milwaukee Public Schools, so on and so forth. I'll open it up to discussion. What do you guys want to see with this item? Chris and Paul.
I have no interest in it.
I guess this is one or two that I don't really know where the ask is coming from, but after reading through some of our regulations, I know the down policy.
Is there administrative need for a policy?
Not that I'm aware of.
Me, if you did have a policy, shorter is sweeter.
Well, in my experience too, generally it fits in your conflict of interest policy, right? I mean, if it's really an issue.
Can't remember which one it was. It might have been, was it Milwaukee? Yeah, Milwaukee's like one sentence.
Yeah, which is really a conflict of interest. So
Yeah.
supervisors shall not. When you read through a couple of them, U of I is kind of like that too. It gets more into the supervision or nepotism or,
Mhm.
which really is a conflict of interest. So to me, that'd be the question, is your conflict of interest sufficient to cover all of that? Personally, that's where I'd go, because
Yeah, and I know this has been on the P&G meeting a couple of times before this, and I certainly not speak on their behalf, but I know Kingsley and Jane have been here before, and it's my recollection from the last time they were here that the question was asked about conflict of interest, and they both thought that there were policies in place that covered that, and that they didn't see the need for additional separate policies beyond those that already existed.
I did have a question regarding the admin guidelines that we have here, 418, and that's the other one, 418.1. They seem to be geared more towards contact with students as opposed to, is that what the purpose of this item being referred to the committee is? Is it with students or is it with work relationships?
I mean, I took it based on the title that it's work relationships.
I presumed it was work relationships too.
Okay. Well,
Anyway, the next board can decide if this is a policy priority or not. That's my 2 cents.
yeah,
And that's just it's not, but
I'm kind of the same mindset. I think if we had anything, I would go with short and sweet and simple, which is, tied to conflict of interest, so.
you're better to focus on conflict of interest and have some normal renewal process where people need to assess themselves whether they have a conflict.
Sure.
You
Yep.
know what I mean?
I just did that for Junior Achievement Board. I'm gonna sign off on that. I do know that there was, and I certainly we can, if it comes up later, we can bring it up. But I know that in one of our meetings with the association, they expressed some concerns about what kind of fraternization policy might be adopted if there was one adopted separate from other policies that currently exist, because we obviously have a lot of partnerships among employees in the district.
Yeah.
Teachers, support staff, et cetera, and so there was concern about what that might mean, and they certainly weren't opposed to it, but at the same time, they said that that would be something that they would have a significant interest in if the board wanted to move such a policy forward. They would want to have the opportunity to have conversation with the administrative team and/or the board about the language that might be included in fraternization.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so that's definitely something that I think looking ahead, if the new board wants to carry that out, they're more than welcome to have that conversation.
And then I would recommend, if that's the case, that we probably want to engage the ICE in that conversation.
Sure.
And the SEIU, just because they're going to have
Absolutely.
questions about that.
You okay with that, Paul? You good?
Yep.
I'm seeing nods around the table. This is good. Okay. So kind of, I guess, along the same vein, item F, conflict of interest. Yeah.
I guess everything on here, the examples were more school board related, but I don't know if that was the point of why this one was added or not.
Who put this one on?
This is either Phil or Chris. I can't recall exactly. We've been collecting things that are thrown our way all summer.
Plain same deal, you need to push it forward, decide it's a priority. Interestingly enough, from a board perspective, there's more need for conflict of interest policy or guidance than ever.
For sure.
I think if they're going to decide to tackle fraternization, and that was decided to be rolled into conflict of interest, that conversation should be had at the same time.
I do think that I do think that what you just said, Director Lynch, is absolutely spot on. Is that in general, I would think that board members would be ethical enough to recuse themselves from any votes that involves special interests that they may be part of. But
But as I looked at what we already have from a governance standpoint, I think it's already there.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Question is, there's no penalty.
Yeah, and I'm not sure you can even enforce one of those.
That's kind of among board norms, right? That's something they'd have to work out at a retreat. Hopefully people would adhere to it.
So I'd say we table that unless the future board decides to take it back up.
I mean, I just think about all the votes in the last 4 years where Patty or yourself, Paul, or even myself have stepped away and said, there's what is it, the punctilio of whatever is the quote, there's even the slightest appearance of a conflict of interest. I think that you should be ethical enough to step away from it, and we do have it in our board policy, so I don't know if we need to be doing anything with this.
Well, and I think one of the reasons that Attorney Holland's presentation is in there is he would argue that there are many times when board members have recused themselves from votes where it's not required
They didn't need to.
that you do so. Obviously, as you just shared, there's the question of what does it look like?
Right.
And what is legal, and I think Joe's argument and why his presentation is in there is that there is a difference between those two. Certainly, you can recuse yourself because of the appearances.
Yeah.
I know one of the things that Joe has said in the past is that you actually have to be careful with that, that you don't take it too far and recuse yourself from things that you should be voting on, because as a duly elected member of the board, there's a requirement that you vote on those things,
Right.
and so you can't punt because you don't want to vote on it, that it really does need to be a bona fide conflict of interest. And so he shared that a couple of times where he's reviewed something that's happened and he says, oh, board member X really shouldn't have recused themselves. So the one thing that might benefit from a conflict of interest policy actually being in place is more clear-cut guidelines for board members, so that the board member doesn't have to ask themselves, is this a conflict of interest?
Yeah.
But it's actually laid out so that they don't say, oh, well, I shouldn't vote for that, when in reality, Joe would argue you should vote for it. So that might be something to, Paul, not necessarily for you two, but for you to think about if we bring this forward at a future time. Is it? I think Joe might argue that it creates some guardrails for board members to drive between, so that there's a higher level of comfort of when they do and don't recuse themselves.
I got it. I mean, I know that one of the ones that I recused myself was like completely silly, but I felt that there was an appearance. It had to do with an insurance contract.
There's only one I can think of where the person should have voted, and those boundaries.
Oh,
They abstained with no reason, no real rationale to abstain.
yeah.
But, for one, I wouldn't, that again was a different thing,
And Steve, just in his presentation, he also talked about if you're going to recuse yourself, you should not take part in the discussion either.
Correct. And he would argue that if you have a valid reason for recusing yourself, that you should announce that when the item is raised,
Yep.
and then recuse yourself from both the discussion and the vote. I think the rationale behind that, and I've got to think back because he was at an earlier meeting that we have, sharing the rationale for that is, it's not just the vote, but it's
Driving the discussion.
Well, it would be.
are you lobbying for a position during the discussion? And does that influence others' votes? And that is just as much of a conflict of interest as voting for it. So if it is something for which you truly have a conflict of interest, then you should also recuse yourself from the discussion, so that there's no appearance that you are working to achieve a specific outcome.
Makes sense, because the action is deliberation and formal action, right? So-
Correct.
Would that apply to teacher salary?
Joe would argue that, and we may need to have him come in here and talk about this, that if you look at the body of law behind it, that you're voting on the collective bargaining agreement, and you're voting on the teachers' contracts, those are separate issues. And so, or support staff, and so I know we've had this discussion before about should you recuse yourself from voting on the contracts, or should you recuse yourself from the negotiation process, depending on where that relationship lies. And I know if I got this right, I'm trying to paraphrase him here or channel him, but when the contracts are up, voting on the contract is not a conflict of interest, because if the contract is governed by the collective bargaining agreement, then voting on the contract is not a conflict of interest for a spouse or partner on the board. Involved in the collective bargaining agreement process, sitting at the table, I think he would argue is a conflict of interest from that standpoint, because now you're influencing the language which will then govern the contract. But actually voting on the contract, I think as I recall, he said in the past, that's not a conflict of interest. But sitting on the bargaining team for that group that represents a spouse or partner would be.
That makes sense.
But I also know that it's been one of those things where when a partner is in an association, that the question has always arisen, should I recuse myself? And people have chosen to do so. His argument is not required. We might want him to come back and share more nuance on it than
I do like his statement that common sense and gut instincts are often the best guide to when a conflict exists. That little voice, that's what I tell my kids, the little voice is saying something, listen to it. So
like I said, that may be something that the board does want to take a look at moving forward, just because it will clarify some of those issues, put some of those guardrails up. It might be nice to have some of those things written down, so a new board member comes in, they've got a spouse or a partner in the district, they know I shouldn't be part of the bargaining team, but I can and should vote on the contracts, and that way, if people ask questions about it, it's been codified. So I think that might be worthy of further dialogue.
So I don't know what we do with this, but.
Well, again, I think it just fits into the new board. You got to decide what's a priority or not.
Yeah.
It could be good as onboarding, just to go through, here's what conflict, these two,
Yep.
just going through these two attachments was helpful.
Right.
And then do people have anything they want to talk about or disclose, or, and then you can decide if you want to go to policy or not, but.
That's a great idea.
And then you can bring Joe back in, have him dig through it in a little bit more detail.
Yeah. Okay. Next item is digital citizenship curriculum, defined student record. The quote from the July 25th meeting was to take it, for P&G to take a, quote, shot at trying to pin down what does or does not constitute student record, unquote. Thoughts?
I'm going to be consistent and kick it forward.
Quite frankly, I'm not entirely sure.
I think initially on this front, we want to be consistent with other districts that are further ahead of us and reapply best practices, period.
I think it would help us as an administrative team if we've got some more directed questions.
Yeah.
In terms of where the concerns are. I know that we've spent quite a bit of time over the last few years defining student records. As a matter of fact, that was an issue that we just dealt with our handbooks. Yeah, with the student directory in terms of what information is part of that disclosure process. So we've been working really hard as an administrative team to narrow that set of definitions of what those records are. We're going through that process for records retention, of making sure that we've accurately defined what are student records and employee records and district records, so that we know what it is that has to be retained and for how long, so that they're on that schedule. So from that standpoint, welcome the opportunity to work on this. Probably just need some more specificity in terms of what to bring forward to you as a board, and where areas of concern lie, so that we can share the research that we've done and better understand what the concerns are about those student records.
Well, I like the suggestion to look at the districts that are ahead of us and
That's what I was
and
doing.
utilize that, because, I mean, this isn't new, right? This isn't new, this isn't special, this isn't anything different than anywhere else in the state that's using Chromebooks and district-owned machines for browser histories and so on and so forth. And that was part of the discussion on July 25th. So I guess I would always encourage us to look at our UEN sister districts and see what they're doing, because some of them are years ahead of us on this. Director Ressler. Yeah. Okay. And then, last time on the agenda is board policy review schedule. If we can get Appendix 8 on the 26th meeting, then Kim, can you make me feel good and put little blue duns next to everything in that first column?
I'll move that out onto.
And then, of course, move the first column to the third column for next year's P&G. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
Got it. Anything else to add for for the future P&G agenda?
Just, this will be in the future, but are we still doing blue zones?
I don't think we need anything with policies on that, so I think that's just a carryover from something that was done in 2014, 15. I think that's all one item, Blue Zones Board Policies, Admin Regulations done, so until it rotates over to the left, we just carried those forward so that you knew they were something that was done. So when that actually rotates up to the, actually that would be rotating up to the 17-18 school year next year, so when it's in the column on the left, we'll take that out because it won't be something that we'll need to do.
Along that vein, the next year, the inclement weather policy, that we do look at that on a 3-year basis, is that?
Yeah, we usually do that just so that we can bring it back forward and you can go through it and make sure that we have the opportunity on a.
Because it kind of didn't exist before.
Right. It didn't exist before, but I think it's a good opportunity to go through and talk about the role of our work with the NOAA guidelines for heat and cold and how those work.
Well, hopefully the heat part of it can go away sometimes.
Hopefully,
Yeah. As early as next year. Well, I certainly hope that the new board gets some folks who are interested in P&G. This has been a great committee to serve on in its different iterations, whether it's policy and governance or policy and engagement. It's been a fun 4 years, and I appreciate the work that you guys have done and learned a heck of a lot. And so, thank you. And unfortunately, I do now know every appendix and every board policy.
you've had the chance to go through all of them.
Someday that will fall out of my head.
Some
maybe.
twice.
Yeah, sometimes twice, yeah. But it's certainly a valuable thing, looking towards the audience, certainly a valuable thing to get involved in if one is looking to learn every policy inside and outside and upside down. Anything else to add for the next P&G agenda? I think it'd be nice to start with a clean slate and just the routine schedule. Cool. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye.